There is a particular kind of thinking that happens quietly, almost without permission. A conversation that has not happened yet is already being replayed. An outcome that has not occurred is already being felt. The mind moves ahead of real life, building entire scenes from nothing but possibility. This video looks closely at why that happens and what it reveals about how people think. Before going further, a brief note. If this kind of analysis is useful, staying subscribed means future breakdowns like this one will be easy to find. No pressure, no urgency, just an open door for anyone who wants to keep thinking alongside this channel. At its core, this pattern involves the mind constructing a detailed mental scene around something that has not yet happened or something that already happened but is being replayed with added detail. It is not the same as simple worry. Worry tends to be vague, a general sense of unease. This is more specific. It has characters, dialogue, tone, even imagined facial expressions. A person might picture exactly how a difficult conversation will unfold, including what the other person will say, how they will react, and how the moment will end. None of it has happened. Yet it feels almost rehearsed, almost remembered. This pattern shows up in small, ordinary moments. Someone sends a text message and does not receive a reply within a few hours. By the time a reply arrives, an entire imagined storyline has already formed, reasons for the delay, assumptions about mood, even imagined explanations the other person might give. When the actual reply turns out to be simple and unremarkable, there is often a quiet sense of mismatch, as if reality did not match the scene that had already been built. Psychology suggests this is a normal extension of how the brain processes uncertainty. It is not unusual, and it is not a flaw unique to a few people. Most people at some point narrate situations internally before they happen. The difference lies in how often this occurs, how detailed the scenarios become, and how much weight is placed on them. To understand why this happens, it helps to look at what the brain is generally trying to do. Research indicates that the human brain is built to predict, not just to react. It constantly tries to anticipate what comes next, using patterns from past experience. This is useful for survival, anticipating danger, preparing for change, adjusting before something goes wrong. But this same prediction system does not only apply to physical threats. It applies to social situations, relationships, and self-image as well. When a situation feels uncertain, the mind often fills that uncertainty with a constructed scenario. This is not random. Often observed behavior shows that people are more likely to imagine detailed scenarios when an outcome feels important, but the information available is incomplete. A delayed reply, a vague comment from a manager, a friend who seems distant, all of these are situations with missing information. The mind does not like sitting in that gap, so it begins filling it with a story that feels coherent, even if it is not accurate. There is also a deeper reason. Imagining a scenario in advance can feel like a form of control. If a person mentally rehearses how a hard conversation might go, they may feel slightly more prepared, even if the actual conversation goes nothing like the version they imagined. The brain seems to treat mental rehearsal as a kind of safety net, a way of softening the unknown by giving it shape, even an imagined one. This behavior tends to appear in a few recognizable settings, regardless of personality or background. One common setting is the workplace. Many people, after sending an important email or making a request to a manager, begin imagining how it will be received. They picture tone, reaction, even body language, despite having no actual information yet. Another common setting is personal relationships, where a single short message or a noticeable change in tone can trigger an entire imagined narrative about what the other person is feeling or thinking. Social situations form another pattern. Before attending a gathering, some people mentally walk through who they might see, what might be said, and how they should respond. This rehearsal can happen so smoothly that, by the time the actual event occurs, the real moment feels almost like a single version among many that were already imagined. Decision-making is a fourth area where this shows up. Before making a choice, switching jobs, ending a relationship, moving to a new place, many people imagine multiple future versions of their life. They picture how each option might unfold, often in vivid emotional detail, long before any decision is made. What connects all of these areas is the same underlying mechanism, an attempt to simulate the future in order to feel more prepared for it. Consider a workplace example. An employee sends a report to their manager and notices the manager has not responded by the end of the day. In the hours that follow, the employee imagines several possibilities. Perhaps the report was disappointing, perhaps it raised concerns, perhaps it will be brought up critically in the next meeting. By the next morning, an entire mental narrative has formed, complete with imagined tone and consequence. When the manager finally responds with a short, neutral message simply saying the report looked fine, the imagined scenario quietly dissolves, leaving behind nothing but the energy it took to build it. Consider a relationship example. Two people are in a long-term relationship, and one partner sends a message that is shorter than usual. The other partner begins to imagine reasons behind it: distance, dissatisfaction, and unspoken issue. By evening, an entire imagined conversation has been rehearsed in the mind, including what might be said if the issue is raised directly. When the partner returns home and explains they were simply busy with a deadline, the imagined scenario is revealed to have had little connection to what was actually happening. Consider a social example. A person is invited to a gathering where they know only a few people. In the days leading up to it, they imagine awkward silences, possible questions they might be asked, and how they might respond. They may even imagine specific people reacting in specific ways. When the event finally happens, it often unfolds in an entirely ordinary way: some conversation, some quiet moments, nothing resembling the more dramatic version that had been mentally prepared for. In each of these examples, the imagined scenario was never tested against reality before it was built. It was constructed entirely from inference, past experience, and emotional sensitivity to uncertainty. It would be easy to view this pattern as simply unnecessary or excessive, but psychology suggests it often serves a function, even when that function is not entirely accurate or helpful. One function is emotional preparation. By imagining a difficult outcome in advance, a person may feel that if it does happen, they will not be caught off guard. There is a sense of psychological insurance in having already pictured the worst version of events. Another function is meaning-making. Human beings tend to dislike ambiguity. An unexplained silence, an unclear tone, an unanswered question, these create a kind of mental itch. Constructing a scenario, even an inaccurate one, can feel like resolving that itch even temporarily. It gives the mind something to hold onto instead of nothing at all. A third function relates to self-protection. By imagining how a conversation might go badly, a person can mentally prepare responses in advance, reducing the risk of feeling unprepared or caught off guard in front of others. This is particularly common in workplace and relationship contexts, where social standing and connection feel important to protect. None of these functions mean the scenarios themselves are accurate. They simply explain why the mind keeps generating them, even when, time after time, reality turns out to be far less dramatic than what was imagined. This pattern is not entirely negative, and it would be inaccurate to frame it only as a problem. There is a constructive side to this kind of mental rehearsal. People who imagine multiple outcomes in advance can sometimes feel more prepared for difficult conversations. Some performers, public speakers, and professionals deliberately use a structured version of this, mentally walking through a presentation or interaction beforehand to feel calmer when it happens. Imagining different perspectives can also build empathy, since picturing how someone else might think or feel requires a kind of mental flexibility. However, research indicates there is a noticeable cost when this pattern becomes frequent or extends into areas where there is no real evidence to support the imagined scenario. One clear cost is emotional. If a person spends hours mentally living through a conversation that turns out to be unnecessary, they have already experienced stress, tension, or sadness for an event that never actually occurred in that form. The body and mind do not always distinguish clearly between an imagined emotional experience and a real one. Both can produce similar physical and emotional responses. Another cost is distorted perception. When someone repeatedly imagines negative outcomes, they may begin to expect them more often, even without new evidence. This can quietly shape how a person interprets ordinary, neutral events, making them more likely to assume tension or conflict where none exists. A third cost is energy. Constructing detailed mental scenarios takes cognitive effort. Over time, this can contribute to a subtle kind of fatigue, especially when the scenarios are emotionally charged. A person may end the day feeling mentally exhausted, even though on the surface, very little actually happened. When this pattern repeats often enough, it can begin to influence real-world behavior, not just internal thought. A person who frequently imagines a friend pulling away may begin acting more cautiously around that friend, even without proof that anything has changed. A person who imagines a manager being critical may start avoiding certain conversations altogether, simply to avoid the imagined discomfort. This creates a subtle loop. The imagined scenario shapes behavior, and that behavior can sometimes shape the real outcome. For example, someone who assumes a colleague is annoyed with them may become slightly more distant in real interactions, which can then create genuine distance, even though the original assumption may never have been accurate. In this way, an imagined scenario can sometimes contribute to creating a small piece of the very reality it was based on, not because the original assumption was correct, but because the behavior built around it became real. Often observed behavior also shows that people who engage in this pattern frequently may become highly skilled at imagining other people's perspectives, even if those imagined perspectives are sometimes inaccurate. This can make them thoughtful and considerate in relationships, but it can also make them prone to assuming they understand someone else's internal state without having confirmed it. Psychology does not suggest eliminating this pattern entirely, since the ability to imagine future situations is a normal and even useful part of human thinking. Instead, the more relevant insight involves awareness, recognizing when a thought is based on confirmed information and when it is based purely on imagination. One useful distinction involves separating assumption from evidence. A thought such as, "they have not replied, so they must be upset," is an assumption, not a confirmed fact. Simply noticing this distinction without judgment can reduce the emotional weight given to imagined scenarios. This does not require suppressing the thought, only recognizing its nature. Another useful approach involves noticing repetition. If the same type of scenario tends to appear again and again, always assuming criticism, always assuming distance, always assuming a negative outcome, this pattern itself becomes useful information. It suggests the mind has a tendency to default toward a particular type of imagined outcome, which is worth noticing simply as a pattern, not as truth. A third helpful approach involves allowing real information to update the imagined scenario, rather than holding onto the imagined version even after reality contradicts it. When a colleague responds in a friendly tone after a period of silence, allowing that new information to fully replace the earlier assumption, rather than holding onto lingering doubt, can reduce the long-term emotional cost of this pattern. None of this requires forcing the mind to stop imagining. It only requires noticing when imagination has quietly been mistaken for certainty. Much of human life is shaped not only by what actually happens, but by what the mind expects to happen. Entire emotional reactions, decisions, and even relationships can be shaped by scenarios that were imagined long before anything was confirmed. This is not unusual, and it is not something only certain people experience. It is a quiet, common feature of how the human mind works when faced with uncertainty. Perhaps the most interesting question is not why this happens, but how often a person's understanding of a situation is based on what was confirmed, rather than what was simply imagined. The line between memory, expectation, and imagination is often thinner than it appears. Recognizing that line, even briefly, may be one of the more valuable forms of self-awareness available, not to stop imagining, but to know clearly when imagination has been mistaken for truth. That brings this analysis to a close. If this perspective offered something worth thinking about, sharing a thought in the comments is always welcome, perhaps a moment where an imagined scenario turned out very differently from reality. Conversations like that often add more insight than any single video could on its own. Until the next analysis, take care.